Hello and welcome to episode 56 of the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor Muir and I like to talk about teaching, whether it's stories and ideas from my own classrooms or lessons I've learned from other educators. I just love to explore ways to help students grow and thrive in school, but also for their educators to thrive as well. So that's what this podcast is. Whatever you teach or however you serve in schools, how can you lead a more impactful, dynamic, and meaningful epic classroom? So, hi friends, welcome back. Today we have a special treat. I promised in the last episode that we're going to start having guests on because I don't have all the answers and all the perspectives and all the ideas. There are people with way better ideas than me, and I am really excited for our first guest in this new era of the podcast. And we'll go back to the traditional formula and go back and forth, but I'm really excited to start talking to people about teaching and education and kids and learning and all that good stuff. And so today I have my friend Shannon Anderson. Shannon is an award-winning children's book author. You've probably heard of some of her books, which we're going to get into in a bit. She's also a speaker, a professor, a certified brain coach, which I want to talk about in a moment. Shannon is also, she's been doing this for over 25 years, educating, working with students and teachers. She was named by the Today Show as one of the top 10 teachers who inspire in 2019. And then on top of her work as an educator and speaker, Shannon, as I said, is a prolific author. She has got so many books, and some of you might have heard of, including I Love Strawberries, which Shannon, I saw there's a picture of Ryan Reynolds himself holding it. Want to know the story behind that in a minute? That's really exciting. She also wrote a book called Y is for Yet, which we're going to talk about today because it's got some big ideas that I love diving into. Actually, the last podcast was talking about growth mindset, and Shannon helps take that idea and make it palatable for kids. So I want to talk about that book. But then also I got to just throw this out there. This isn't necessarily all that we're going to talk about, but I think it ties in really well. Shannon also has a new book coming out in February this winter for writing instruction, and it's called Writing from Scratch, Lesson Plans to Boost Your Classroom Writing Instruction. And I got to be an early reader of this book, which is really fun. Shannon and her publisher, which is also my publisher, sent me a copy, and I got to read it, and it is wonderful. As a writing teacher myself, as an author and writer myself, it just is practical. I've read so many writing books that are just about theory and the idea of writing, which is great. I like the big ideas, but I also really like the nitty gritty and the practical. And so she's written this book and it's really good. I'm going to put the link for pre-sale in the notes so you can go check it out. So that's what that is. Shannon, thanks for being on the podcast and to talk about all this good stuff you're doing. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I still remember back when, I don't remember how many years ago it was that we were both presenting at a conference and that I had a picture taken with you with your epic book. And
Yes.
I love that book. And I also got to be a pre-reader for your newest mindset book, teacher mindset book, and it's
Mhm.
amazing as well.
Oh,
Mindset is my jam. So I'm excited to be here to get to talk about that
oh,
today.
well, thanks. And I do remember it was in Indiana. I'm trying to think. Yeah, it was in Indiana, and we were at a conference, and I first met you there, and you had your books all set up, and that was in 2019.
Oh, wow. Okay. It's been
And
a little
be,
while.
yeah, it's been a while. And in COVID years, I like to think of all years after the pandemic as dog years. So it's been about 35 years
Yes.
since we got together. And then I was walking through the Indianapolis airport this summer on
Oh,
the way to a speaking gig, and I was walking through, and I was like, "Wait a minute, I know her." And I saw your big giant picture. I was like, "Is that she?" Yes, it is. So seeing you all over the place since 2019. One of them being the wall of the airport.
yes.
How did you get on the wall of the airport?
Oh, goodness. Well, what happened was Indiana Wesleyan, which is where I got my master's degree, asked me to be in a commercial for them. So they flew me to
Hmm,
Salt Lake City, Utah to film
fine.
the commercial. and I must have signed something saying they could use my still shots for marketing. And I really have no recall of that. And all of a sudden, I started getting texts from people saying,
Oh,
"Hey,
very
you're
smart.
in the airport." And then it ended up on 4 billboards
Shut
in
up.
Indianapolis,
That's so
one of
good.
which my daughter like passed, and she said, "Mom, we're on our way to church and you're on a billboard." And I'm like,
Oh
"What?"
my God.
So
Well,
imagine my surprise.
at least they're using it for noble cause, right? Like
Yeah, I guess so. It's promoting education, so that's a good thing.
that is really, really funny. And you've got so, and then before we get into why is for yet, and I know you wrote that a while ago, but it is so relevant still. How did Ryan Reynolds stumble across I Love
Oh,
Strawberries?
I
Because
don't
I
know
love Ryan
who I need
Reynolds.
to hug who gave him the idea to use that book, but he started a TV show. He has 4 kids, and he
Mm.
started a TV show called Bedtime Stories with Ryan. And each night, I mean, there are like these like they almost look like Muppets, but they're lambs that are in bed, and he's reading to the sheep to help the sheep go to
Mm.
sleep. And every episode he reads 2 books. And I guess they had reached out, like his people reached out to my publisher and said, that they were potentially looking at using I Love Strawberries. And, would I grant permission for him to do that? I'm like, are you kidding? I mean, of
Well, let me
course.
see.
Yeah, let me think about it. And so then it was just a matter of waiting to see if he did end up
Yeah.
using it. So every night I was tuning in to Bedtime Stories with
Oh my
Ryan.
gosh, that is
And
amazing.
on the 13th episode, lo and behold, I saw him pull it up and I was just like crying tears of joy
Oh,
because it was amazing just to hear him say, "I Love Strawberries" by Shannon Anderson. I'm like, oh my gosh, he said my name. So that was
that
pretty
is
cool.
unbelievable to have
Yeah.
Deadpool read your book.
Yeah.
That's so good. And it's like, listen, I know he's just another person, but it's also like he's got a huge reach and audience. And so like for people
Yeah,
to read your work and to see your beautiful writing and out there, that's got to be a little surreal.
it is. It
That's
is.
really
Yeah.
fun. Well, and so like let's start with that. So like how did you get into writing children's books? And did you ever think that it was going to get to the point where Ryan Reynolds would read it
Ah,
to the entire world? We're talking about growth mindset today and this
right,
ability
right.
to keep growing and thinking that way. How did you get into it? And what's the journey to get to the place where you're
Well,
writing
there
books
were
that
kind of
people have
some
heard of?
seeds planted along the way. When I was in 5th grade, we had our first ever author visit, and
Mm,
that author, it was Jamie Gilson. She wrote Can't Catch Me on the Gingerbread Man, and she had a school-wide writing contest leading up to her visit, and whoever won got an autographed copy of her book. Well, of course I entered, and I had taken, you could turn in your story in any format you wanted, and I had taken a little notebook, like a 5x7 notebook, and ripped off the cover and designed my own cover and wrote the story
mm.
within the pages. And I saw when she walked up there, she was holding her book, but she was also holding my book.
Oh,
And so I was very excited because I knew that was probably good news. And sure enough, she called me up there and I got to shake her hand and meet her. And I was just always a kid who wrote in diaries and wanted to write stories and poems.
mhm.
And so that was just one of those things that it was so cool to see this person who got to do that as their job. And so from there, my high school job was working in the public library in the children's section. I was in
Mhm.
charge every evening from 4 o'clock when the children's librarian left for the day until 8 when they closed. And so I got to be the children's librarian.
Yeah.
And I loved getting to help kids find a book I thought they would enjoy. I loved being surrounded by the books that I loved as a kid. And I loved the perk of when a brand new book would come in, I got to read it before anyone else could check it out. So I just loved that job. And I always thought about how cool would that be if one of my stories could someday become an actual book that ends up on a library shelf. And so it was one
And
of
you
those
really
things.
did like dream that up in high
I kind of
school?
manifested it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And my senior year, I was still writing in diaries. I still do today. I have a whole shelf of journals over there.
Mm.
And I wrote in my senior year diary that someday I was going to be a teacher and a children's book author. And that was in 12th grade. And, the first part, becoming a teacher, was kind of a clear cut path, but
Mhm.
becoming a children's book author is not. There isn't a children's book authoring major in college or anything
Yep.
like that. It's a lot of going to workshops and conferences and getting critiques and learning from others. And it took quite a few years for me to get to that point. My first book came out 10 years ago. And since then, I've published a whole bunch of books and now I love it. Just a few years ago, I stopped teaching to do this full time.
No kidding. I mean, so like what kind of failures like happen along the way?
Um,
Because like that's part of growth mindset is like, okay,
yes. So
fail forward, but
my favorite failure story to share at author visits is about this book here. I Love Strawberries.
mm,
My book that is the most successful book of all the books I've written. If you count my work for hire books, I've written over 100 books. But
that's
I
insane.
Love Strawberries is the book that, I mean, you can see some of the stickers here. It's won like 8 different awards, including
Hmm.
National Book of the Year. Ryan Reynolds read it. Like all kinds of things have
Yep.
happened. Now I Love Blueberries is coming out in April. It's been very successful. But what people don't know, and this is what kids need to know to understand growth mindset and to embrace it, is it's the iceberg effect. You
Mm,
see all of the good and all the success, but you don't know the behind the scenes, what happened
yes.
behind the curtains. And what happened was 10 years of rejection on that book. 10 years. I got told, no, it's too long, or you know, we think that it's going to be too hard to illustrate because you have diary entries for every single page, plus the narrative text, plus the illustration that would have to be taking place. And how would we show? Are we illustrating what she's thinking in her diary?
Mm,
Are we illustrating just the story currently? It would be too difficult, to have someone do that. And so I kept revising, I kept going to workshops, I kept getting critiques on it. And finally, my whole angle with it was it's a book about perseverance. This
hmm.
girl is not giving up. She wants to have a strawberry patch, and anytime her parents throw an excuse her way, she comes up with something to figure out how to get through it. So this
Yeah.
is a book on growth mindset. When her parents say, like strawberry plants are actually kind of expensive, she has a lemonade stand. And when they say, it's hard work to grow something, she starts growing something. And she shows that she's responsible by taking care of her bunny. She's doing all of these things. And
Hmm.
eventually she's able to prove that she is responsible enough and gets to grow the strawberries. And so my character had to have perseverance, but also the author had to have some perseverance because it got turned down so many times.
Did it even get turned down by publishers who already published some of your other work? They just said like,
Yeah.
no, this specific one is just not right.
Yep.
How wild is that? But then what made you decide to keep doing it then? Like, why not just scrap that title and say, all right, this is clearly not going to be the one. I'll just
Well,
give it to
here's
my
the funny
kids.
thing. The very first conference I went to, my very first ever writing conference,
Mm-hmm.
it was like in 2010. I brought that manuscript with me because they had different contests you could enter
Mm,
when you went to the conference, and it was like a 3 or 4 day conference. So
yeah.
I entered the kids division, and I won first place with that manuscript 10 in 2010
Not even with illustrations.
with no illustrations. It was just the manuscript and it won first place. It was not a huge deal. I mean, it's like a $50 prize.
Yeah,
But
but
it gave me a little bit of courage to send it out. But then
uh,
as I kept sending it out, I was even getting other books published at the time. But that
mm-hmm.
one, for whatever reason, people, just didn't want to take it on. And then when Feeding Minds Press saw it, they do all agriculture books and they saw that
Mm-hmm.
it shows growing strawberries. I hadn't even considered that angle. I mean, I had grown strawberries for many years. I had always had a strawberry patch,
Yeah.
but I wasn't using that angle. That was just kind of like the vehicle to show her persevering. And
Mm-hmm.
so then when that angle was taken, it just like took off. And
That's
so,
incredible. Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, so like failure, like I mean, rejection hurts. You know what I mean? Like, and I think we
yeah.
all feel it. I sometimes still like have like I get rejected from certain things. Like I had the
Mhm.
opportunity to go speak, or I thought was an opportunity to go speak somewhere that I really wanted to go, and I had a phone call with this conference, and they were like, "Oh, this is all great," and then like I didn't hear anything for 2 weeks, and then I sent an email like, "Hey, just checking in. Should I buy plane tickets?" And they said, "Oh no, we went with somebody else."
Oh,
You're like, "Oh, that
yeah.
hurts." And it's
Yeah.
like you can see how like that would make you like not want, or it's like, all right, well, I better figure something else out. But then
Yeah.
it's like, no, that's not what I do. It's like, no, all right,
Yeah.
well. I'm gonna go do something else, and I'm gonna make you regret that you not even not really, but like I hope someday you come to something else and you see why that would have been a good decision. Like, what was it that kept you persevering specifically with this work? And then I want to broaden it out to how do we help students kind of have that same mindset? But like with that specific one, what made you keep chasing it when it was just getting no's over and over and over?
Well, first of all, I always used to tell my students that no stands for next opportunity,
Oh, that's
and it's an
good.
opportunity to grow. And that fail stands for first attempt in learning. And so
Hmm.
every time you fail, it's another attempt. And as you know, like our brains get stronger through practice
Mm.
and putting in those reps. So the
Yep.
more we fail, and that's why I wrote this book, Yay, You Failed,
Oh.
because I wanted to share that the more you fail, the more it shows you're trying and you're building those neural pathways, and that is actually causing your brain to get better and better.
Hmm.
So I think for me, it was knowing so much about growth mindset anyway. And
Hmm.
my mom always kind of said I was pretty strong-willed.
Yep. Yep.
And I always took that as
A
a
better way to
positive
put it. I
trait,
like
although I
that.
don't think she always meant it that way.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But I've always been a very determined person. And
Hmm.
so I wasn't going to give up on it. I will admit, I got pretty darn close to sending it through the shredder. 10 years is a long time.
Yeah.
And it's not that I was consistently sending it out like every month or anything, but it
Hmm.
was a lot of rejection. And so I just knew that if I kept improving it, that eventually, I believed in the story. I felt like it had a solid, message, but it also had some humor. And I felt like kids would like it. And so I just kept sending it out there and trying different places.
Yeah, and it's the belief that like it's getting better as right? Like I can improve it. You improve, right? Like we all just
Yeah.
get better at what we do the more we keep doing it. Right? Like
Yeah.
I look at some of my writing from like 2015 and I'm like cringe a little bit. I'm like, "Oh, I want to take it off the internet so
I
nobody
know.
sees me use all those adverbs." Or like, "Oh, it's so corny." But you're like, "Yeah, you know what? I don't judge that because it's like that's where I was
That's
at
right.
that time, and this is where I am now. And I'm sure someday I'll look back at my work now and be like, oh, that's what you said. And it's like, yeah, because it's just all this process.
Well, and here's the thing. I always tell kids, well, and adults, because now I do motivational talks for adults, but
Hmm.
it's important to learn to stink at something new.
You,
And everyone is a beginner at some point in whatever new skill or thing they
yep,
want to try. And so being a beginner it's humbling,
yep,
but if you want to be able to do something, anyone who is successful at that thing was a beginner once.
yeah.
They all had to start somewhere. So we don't just know how to do something automatically. And so many times, one of the pages that I marked in this book, Mindset Power.
Boy,
So
you like mindset and
I do.
perseverance and
Why is for
resilience.
Yet is the picture book form. So this is like for younger kids, although I've
Hmm.
had high schools adopt it as part of their curriculum because
So
each
good.
concept isn't really meant for this isn't an alphabet book. I used
Yep.
the alphabet, as a means to deliver all of this information. But, some of the words like R is for resilience. These are big things that kids of any age and adults need to know and understand. But one of the things about growth mindset, we can tell kids that the power in growth mindset is understanding that the more we practice something, the more we try things, even when we fail, we actually learn more through our mistakes
Yeah.
than we do if we get it successfully the first time. And so many times my students would get frustrated, like, but it doesn't feel good to fail, and it's
Yes.
it's so hard when that happens. It's easier to say, oh well, if you fail, you just brush it off and get back up again.
Hmm.
And it doesn't feel very good in the moment. And so one of the things that I put in the back here was if growth mindset's so powerful, why doesn't everyone have it?
Mm.
Well, some people are afraid to take risks. Some people are afraid to be wrong. Some people don't want to be embarrassed when their strategies don't work the first time. And some people get impatient when it takes too long to reach a goal. Some people don't want their goals badly enough. Some people don't know what tools to use. Some people don't feel comfortable asking for help. Some people don't know how to plan their first step. And some people just don't know how growth mindset can help them. And so
Mm.
one of the things that I talk about, especially like with the little kids, I try to give them a really basic like neuroplasticity lesson.
Yep, yep.
So when,
I literally wrote down neuroplasticity
yeah,
to ask you
okay.
about.
Yes. So when we're first learning something, we have billions of neurons, brain cells going on, doing all their things. And when we're first learning something, it's a very weak connection. So let's
Mhm.
say I usually use the example of learning to shoot a free throw shot, something very
Oh
basic
yeah.
that everyone knows what it is. So you decide, I'm gonna join the basketball team and I got to get good at my free throw shots. This is something I can practice on my own without the team there.
Yep.
So you go to shoot the basket and it's a complete air ball. It's, too wimpy. And that neural connection that you just built, like shooting the ball, the neurons that had to talk to each other, your motor neurons that control your muscles and what you're thinking about, your aim, all of those things,
Mm.
those certain neurons talked to other neurons for that to happen. But it was a very weak connection. So, like this piece of string can represent that weak connection.
Okay.
So it's easily broken. But
Hmm.
then I have this success cycle that I talk about. So the top of the success cycle is to try something. So you just tried to shoot the ball, and then the second part of it is fail, and that's your
Hmm.
first attempt in learning. And so you failed, it was an air ball. But then the next part is learn. So what did I learn about that shot that I took? Well, I learned that I need to give it some more oomph because that wasn't enough. And so the last part of it over here, because we've got these four parts of the cycle,
Hmm.
is improve or change something. And so I'm going to tweak something to make it better before I try again. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to think about, well, how could I make it have more oomph? Well, I can push off more with my legs and with my arms to get that ball up there.
Yep.
And so here I go again on the success cycle. I'm starting over with try. So now I'm going to put that new way into practice, my new method. And so I go to shoot it and I shoot it so hard that it goes over the backboard this time. And so now I failed, but again, I learned something else. So in the learning part, I learned that was too much power.
Mm.
So in my improving and tweaking, it's going to be, well, I need to do a little bit less power, but more than the first time. And then I try again. And you can see how, as you're going through that success cycle, you learn so much about what doesn't work, which helps you figure out what does work. Those mistakes help us. And as you're doing that, so we had this wimpy little connection to start with. But as we keep practicing, those same neurons are firing.
Mm.
And so eventually they say what fires together wires together. So now we've got a bunch of those neurons working together. And then eventually it gets a little bit stronger. I tore apart a dog toy to
And
get this.
if you're not watching the video right now, she
Yes.
started with a string and then
Yes.
two strings woven together, and now
Oh,
dog rope.
then you have this. And this is
Hmm.
when you have your shooting free throws neural pathway. This
Yes.
is automaticity. And so that is what we want with kids is to reach that point where it's no longer something that you have to use as much executive functioning in your brain that it comes to you. Like I could bend over right now, keep talking to you and tie my shoe because I have a tying shoes neural pathway already built.
Mm.
I have automaticity with that.
That is so fascinating. And isn't it true that neuroplasticity happens the most outside of the comfort zone? Like when
Oh,
we're
yes.
not comfortable?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where it's like,
Kids, if we can give kids these little examples of things they've already accomplished, like tying their shoe, riding a bike without training wheels, how many times they crashed before they finally figured out that balance, and what, now they have a riding bike neural pathway. They always say that it's just like getting on a bike again. That's where
yes.
it comes from. You have that, we call it muscle memory, but it's also that automaticity. It's also neural plasticity that's happening. And if we can show them and prove to them, you have neural pathways for this and this and this and this. And even though you're really struggling right now with your times seven multiplication facts, if you keep practicing, you're going to have a neural pathway for that. And you'll be eventually able to do, 7 times 8, 56. You don't have to build an array or do repeated addition. You're going to know it. And
Yes.
that's empowering for kids to understand that our brain is designed to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think, isn't that, there's so many things I could say. There's that famous stat, and it's actually true. Like a massive percent of new teachers quit after their fifth year because it's too hard and they don't know how to do it. And it's like, oh, listen, I hear you. It is hard,
Mhm.
but you don't have the automaticity yet. Is that the
Yeah.
word? Right?
Yeah.
Like you haven't developed the clockworkness of being able to lead students yet. It takes time and
Mhm.
failure and effort.
Yep.
I think about that. That's why I love hearing this neuroscience behind it, because it's really, you can have an inspirational line like, you're just not good at this yet, and you'll be better at this later, and you got to work on it. And it's like, yeah, that's great. But to know, it's like, oh no, that yet is really, there's a lot
Real.
going on when you get better at
Yeah.
something. My
Yeah.
son is just been struggling with math in fifth grade. It's like, this is where it starts getting real, right? This is where you
Mhm.
start doing
Yeah.
long division and times sevens and all these things. Um he's so, yesterday was such a fun day because he had his first math test and he got like a 73. And he's like, Dad, I got a 73. I was like, did you try your hardest? Yeah. Did you give your very best effort when you took it? Yeah. Then I'm proud of you. That's the best you could do. And then he got an 86. And then yesterday he came home and he had a 95. And it's like, it's
Awesome.
not just about the
Yeah.
95. It's the fact that we kept gritting through it, right?
Yes.
Like we kept sitting down, you kept working. And then now what you're saying here is like blowing my mind, because it's like, oh, not only did we just have perseverance and keep working, your brain was growing thicker rope, right? Like it was
Yeah.
forming connections. And now that grade isn't just like, oh, here's your prize, a 95%. It's
Yeah.
evidence that this work that you've been putting in and those feelings of failure and discomfort are paying off, right? Like here's the
Right.
result of it.
Yeah. It's not a one and done. So
Yeah.
that effort does cause those neural pathways to form, and we keep making more and more. Now, it's important for kids to also understand, though, that it can work the opposite way because
Mm.
our brains are very efficient and it will prune things that are not being used. So think about, like, for me, I used to be able to speak Spanish, not super fluently, but pretty well. I mean, like when I
Hmm.
went to Mexico, I could hold a conversation, sort of.
Yep.
And now that I'm not using it, guess what? I've forgotten a lot of it. I've lost some of the
Mm.
strength of the neural plasticity there in speaking Spanish.
Yep.
Now, the research is showing that if you lose something like that and you start to relearn it, that you gain it more quickly than if you had never had it. So that's good news.
So I can
But
still
we
go
also
relearn
just,
the saxophone again. I haven't played it since seventh grade, but I
yeah.
can I can pick it back up.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great example. And so that's why
Mm.
our kids need to understand that too when we're doing something that's a close read and we're reading something for the fourth time and they're like, why do we have to read this again? And you're like, okay, so here's why. Because if we keep doing this thing, we're going to keep building those pathways and you're going to remember it. And we're looking at new things with each layer. And so we can help, if we can help kids understand at the very basic level what is going on in their brain as they're learning, then that can help them to not get as frustrated and not have as many doubts because now it's not about if this person is smart or this person is not.
Hmm.
It's now about how many times did this person practice versus this person. And I always try to give this big talk at the beginning of my school year about how you may see someone that gets something like that
Yeah.
and you may be feeling like, oh, I must not be very smart because they got it right away. Well, first of all, they might have already known it coming into the classroom.
Hmm.
But second of all, it's really about the amount of experience someone has had with something. And I give them examples like Evie over here has horses. She knows how to saddle a horse, how to feed a horse, how to take care of a horse. I wouldn't have a clue. I would have to learn those things. Tony over here, he is on the soccer team. I've only played soccer in PE class. He's going to be able to teach me way more. And I'm an adult. I've lived for over 50 years and he knows more than I do. And so it's not about how old you are, what grade you're in, or anything at all. It's what things have you practiced? Someone who's never touched a saxophone is not going to be able to do very well, but someone who has practiced it some is going to be able to produce notes and a song maybe. And so that's what it's about. And if kids understand that and they realize, oh, so the power's back on me. When I practice something, I get good at it. And so the more I practice something, the better I get at it. And you can use analogies with sports and people in the Olympics. I mean, the level of training and practice that they're doing to get to where they are, students need to understand that people didn't come out of the womb able to do these things that are breaking records and all of that. It's the level of practice and experience that they've had. And yes, there is some level of some natural talents and abilities,
Hmm.
but by and far, it is the level of practice and dedication and experience.
Yeah, I mean that's why like Dr. Angela Duckworth in the book Grit,
Yep.
she did all those long form studies and just discovered that 80+% of success is owed to resilience and
Yes.
perseverance and practice and
Uh-huh.
overcoming challenge and living in discomfort. Roughly 20% is owed to that IQ you were born with or the talent
Right.
you were born with. That is a small percentage. Um, but you know, like one of the things that's coming to mind as you're saying all this is like, yeah, this is so true. And yet the school system isn't always built up to support this type of learning, right? Like when we average students' grades, when we say, all right, you got uh, 65% in August, and then we practiced and got a lot better, and then in November you got an A. Well, guess what? That 65% is being averaged in with that A. It's like, wait, that 65% isn't reflective at all of where the student is now. That's where
Right.
they were before work and practice and instruction and affirmation and critical feedback and peer editing and all the work that we put into it. What in the world are we paying any attention to that
Yes.
65%
That's
anymore?
such a good point. Yep.
Right? And so like, I mean, how do you feel like, and yeah, I'd love for, what are some practical ways that teachers can help students embrace failure in the classroom? How can we do that well? Because in my own experience, but then a lot of places I've gone and worked with teachers, um, failure is frowned upon in school. Failure is penalized with grades. It's penalized with lost recess. It's penalized with your self-esteem and your own confidence. Like, right? Like we even like call the worst grade an F, fail, right? Like
Mhm.
we do this. So what are whether you work within a system that's still very anti-failure or you're in a place that it's like, all right, I just need to learn how to do this. What are some practical ways that we can actually promote this growth mindset you're talking so much
Well,
about?
first off, I think we have to help kids understand what growth mindset is. So your
Mm,
mindset is your set of beliefs about something, and we all know what growth is. It's how you develop.
yep.
And so using, basic descriptions of neurons and how the neuroplasticity works and how their brains work specifically. I have all kinds of object lessons that I do, like resilience. I have this little weeble wobble and talk about, like they weeble them, they wobble, but they don't fall down because they eventually always get back up. And so can we. Like no
Mm,
matter how hard we fail, like I can throw this thing across the room and it's going to get back up again.
yep.
And so can we. But the other thing is, as you mentioned, that powerful word yet. I didn't let my students in my classroom use the word can't unless they put the word yet at the
So
end of
good.
that sentence. And the other thing that I used to call mistakes in my classroom, we didn't call them mistakes, we called them growth spurts.
Mm,
So if we were in my room and we were working on some hard four-step math problem and all of a sudden someone says, I can't figure it out, you would see me and everyone else in the room go, "Ugh," like they used
uh-huh.
the word and then they'd be like, I mean, I can't figure it out yet. And then
Yeah.
it's that word yet that gives you that little bit of hope and that little reminder that, oh, in this moment, I don't have it.
Mm,
But perhaps I can ask a good question, or I can see how this person figured it out, or I can try a different strategy. And so
mm-hmm.
there are those kinds of things that we can put in place. But the other thing is, if you look at Carol Dweck's work, one of my favorite experiments that she did is on the power of praise. And
Mm,
this changed how I praised students in the classroom and my own kids as a parent. And what she did is she had this task that these kids did, and she divided the kids into two groups. So one of the groups was praised for, you're so smart, you're bright, look at you, you're so
mm,
talented at this. And the other half were praised for their effort. So, oh, wow, look at you not giving up, and you're working so hard. And I appreciate that you're persevering, those kinds of things. It was all effort praise. And it was amazing the results of what happened because the kids then were given the chance to do a task, and there was a harder task and an easier task offered to all of
mm,
these kids. Well, the kids who were praised for their effort, for, not giving up, for working so hard, trying different strategies, chose by and large the harder
mm.
task. because they were praised for working hard and not giving up and doing multiple things to get there. And they wanted to be able to keep that praise. Well, here's the sad part. The kids that were called smart, there's nothing they can do to be smart, to change something. And
Mm,
so, in order to keep that label, they're feeling valued because you see me as smart. I better not do anything to take away that label. And so, they're now afraid to fail, and they would take the easier task because they want to continue to be praised for being smart. And
mm-hmm.
I never thought about this. And I feel so guilty in my first few years teaching first grade. I called my first graders little smarties all the time. And
Yeah.
I didn't realize that, I thought I was building them up. And I didn't realize that actually, no, it would have been better to say, look how hard you're working, or I love how you didn't give up on this, or I love how
Mm,
you tried another way. Because then the experiment goes on, and you'll have to go on YouTube. And anyone listening, if you go on YouTube and look at Carol Dweck's praise
mm-hmm.
experiment, it's just great because then I don't know if I remember all of it, but it kept going. So then after that happened, they were given like a task that was equally as hard as the very first one, which wasn't that hard.
Yeah.
And there was like a 50% difference in the people that were praised for their effort versus the people who were praised for being smart.
The old.
50% difference in how well they did. So that is a huge effect that happened just because of the way that these kids were praised and how they wanted to keep that label. And so we just have to be really careful when we're talking to kids about when they're struggling and when they're successful, how
Mm-hmm.
we word that, because it does make a difference.
It absolutely does. And I think this comes with practice. And
Mhm.
especially like there's some unlearning that think has to happen for us to be able to adopt this type of mindset.
Mhm.
But like, yeah, you can see the power. And I think about my own kids and the way that we praise them and the way they respond to certain things. And you're right. Like, I mean, there is there's a truth to when we just say, oh, you're smart. It's like, yeah, that means, oh, you're born special in this way. And
Yeah,
it's like, well, of
there's
course I
nothing
can.
you can do to change that really,
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
yeah,
It's fixed,
right?
right? But
Yeah.
when it's like, oh no, you are working, you're working hard, or hey, I love the effort you're putting into that.
Yeah, because you
Um,
can do something about that. You can control your amount of effort.
yeah.
So I guess some other things would be I used to teach my kids how to set goals, and
Mm,
I would work on, we had long-term goals, like I would do vision boards with them and things, but I
mhm.
also had a goal board in my room that I purposely made them do shorter term goals that had to be a month or less.
Okay.
And I used it instead of SMART, the specific, measurable, all of
Yep.
that. It seemed like a lot. And so I shortened it in the Mindset Power book to SET. So
Mm,
the S is still specific, but the E part is effort. And
okay.
so the E is what effort? In other words, what kind of practice are you going to do? What kinds of learning are you going to do to get the skill
Hmm.
practiced? What reps are you putting in? And then the T is your time, like the amount of time you're going to practice daily or weekly, and the amount of time you're setting for yourself to then meet this goal. And my kids would have these on post-it notes, and I had like their name and a spot for at least 3 post-it notes at any given time. And I not only encouraged them to set goals for the classroom, but I always wanted at least one of those to be a personal goal.
Mm,
Maybe they're in gymnastics and they want to master their back walkover. I
yeah.
mean, I want them to understand that growth mindset is not just for learning stuff at school, it's in our life. Like
Yes.
anything we do requires a growth mindset if we want to stick with it. And so I would visit that board every day. I
Hmm.
would kind of look and see, okay, someone's coming close to their date that they thought they were going to make this goal. And I'll just have a little conversation with them. And
Yeah.
if they're on track and they're doing great, I'm going to encourage them. And if they're struggling in some way, then we can look at all three of those things. The S, were you specific enough? Like, do we know if you're meeting the goal? The E, so if the effort
Hmm.
part isn't there, like maybe you're not practicing enough, or maybe the kind of practice you're doing isn't moving you, it's not moving the needle. And so you need to change the practice or the reps that you're doing, the kind of learning that you're doing, or maybe you need some practice plus mentoring
Yeah.
or coach of some kind. And then the T part, like maybe this isn't a month-long goal. Maybe you need more time. And that's
Yeah.
okay too, because we start to learn as we learn about how much time we may need to learn something. And thankfully, a lot of times we don't have to have a set amount of time to learn something, that we can, if we continue to practice, learn it as
Yep.
our brain allows.
Oh. So good. One of the questions I've been just asking a lot lately and creating and learning about and is what is the ideal graduate? What do we want students to be like when they're done with this whole education experiment?
Mhm.
And something you just said is, and I ask this question to teachers all the time because the question is like, all right, if we want them, or if the big question is if we want students to be like this after school, when it's all said and done, when we're really asking, what do we want people to be like? Well, then what should school look like? Because this is a pretty formative experience. And
Yes.
every single time people say we want hard workers, people that can put in effort, and people that are reliable and show up and are there and working. So like I hear this all the time, and it's like, well, then we can practice it. We can name it, right? We can start incorporating it. And like how you said, this isn't just for school learning, this is everywhere in life, right?
Yeah.
Like when you go home, like I can get better at certain things I do outside of school. I can get better at the sports I play. If there's something that I want to read better books or harder books, if I want to, whatever it is, it's like this applies to your whole life. Um,
Yes.
and I think that's the attitude we have to have as educators is what lessons are we imparting on students that they're going to want to have their whole entire lives? Because as a grown adult now, I'm not going to say grown up. I'm not planning on growing up quite yet, but as a grown person, I still love learning. I
Oh,
love
yeah.
figuring out new stuff. I love
Well, that's
trying
why
new.
I took those neuroscience classes. That wasn't something I had to take. I
Yeah.
took full different courses
Yes.
because I am just very interested in how our brain works. And that's so empowering for kids to understand. Even when I taught first grade, I used to do this thing where there was a cutout of a head, and I would put like the a light bulb in the prefrontal cortex area that we would
Okay.
glue on. And then we would put a heart in kind of the limbic system, of the
Hmm.
brain, how our amygdala can cause so many emotions and things and cause us to get out of our prefrontal cortex where we're
Yep.
not able to think and use logic. And then a little dinosaur for the brainstem to show the part where, we might go into fight or flight or freeze. And having kids just at the very basic level understand that if we're in a point where we're frustrated or we're really doubtful or we're crying because we just feel like there's no way we could do this, then we are downshifting. And we need
Yes.
to, in order to learn something, to be in that stage where we are practicing, we have to be up in the prefrontal cortex. We just
Yep.
have to. And so, just at the basic level, having them understand, oh, I need to shift my emotions right now and think, I need to do some kind of breathing exercise or something that's going to help me calm down so that I can then get back into a mindset of remembering I've failed before. And with practice, I got better at it.
Yep.
And even having kids journal things like that, like what are some things that you failed at before that now you can do, like riding the bike? I mean, very basic things. And then that reminder that I've done hard things before and I've gotten through it, and it made, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We could play that song.
Yeah, I love
But
it. And I just want to remind all of our secondary teachers out there, this all applies to your students as well. This isn't just
oh, yeah,
elementary. This is for all of us, by the way.
this
But
is
like,
for adults.
but yeah, exactly. And you know what? And so I think we have to name it in our own lives and work, but we also can help high schoolers understand what growth mindset is. We can talk about the use acronyms like know and fail and help them understand like, hey, you can get better at this. Even if you're doing more complex learning, there's still always room for growth.
And there are some great books like the Epic Fails series is this
Hmm.
series of books like there are science and social studies related of people who have failed in history
Yes.
and in
So good.
science in their discoveries and the different things that they've done. I mean, like the Wright brothers, of course. And,
Hmm.
you know, have again, making sure that kids understand that these things that happened didn't just happen the first time someone tried something.
Yeah.
It happened because of lots and lots of practice and lots of failures. And then eventually they went through the success cycle enough times that either they or someone else after them figured it out with even more practice.
Yeah, and I also, and we'll finish with this. I think we have to reveal our own failures as well sometimes.
Yes.
I think students have to
Yep.
know that we bleed, that we
Yeah.
fail, that we didn't get to where we are magically, that it took work and it took failure. I got into college, except I had to take remedial math to get into it because math just was difficult. And I had to do that before I could get in. And I think sharing that with students, I share it with my own kids. I'm like, listen,
Mhm.
math was not always easy for me either, but I did it.
Yep.
but it hurt. It was failing along the way. But I think being honest and vulnerable with students is also a really great place to start.
Yeah, that's great role modeling.
So, oh, so good. I could talk about this all day long. It's
Me
so
too.
good. Yeah, I know. And you do talk about this all day long. And so, if you do authors visits.
I do.
Oh, awesome. So
Professional
Shannon,
development for writing and for growth mindset stuff.
I love it. So if you want to get in touch with Shannon, you can go to
ShannonIsTeaching.com is my website. That's probably the easiest way. There's a contact me tab on there and other information. So
awesome. You can also put whoever is interested in touch with Ryan Reynolds if they want to.
oh, right.
Is that something we can do?
Yeah, I'm sure he remembers me.
Well, we do, and I am just so appreciative. Anything else you would like to say, or where we can find you anywhere else? You said your website.
Yeah, my website. I do have a TED Talk that talks about goal setting.
Yes.
If you go on YouTube and put in my name, Shannon Anderson, and TEDx MSU, because it was at Michigan State University that I did it, that is what I have used and what a lot of high school teachers have told me they've used for growth mindset, talking with their high schoolers. And I've also done it for universities about setting our goals and figuring out our life purpose and what we want to put those reps in, for.
Awesome.
So that's another place you could go.
So good. I will link that into the show notes as well. Your new book comes out in February, which is so exciting. And so can't wait to have that out there. And maybe we can have you back on then to talk specifically about that. So
yeah, I'd love to.
So, all right, Shannon, thanks so much. Appreciate you being on the podcast today.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay.
This is the Epic Classroom Podcast. My name is Trevor. Thanks, everybody, for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.